Hello everyone and welcome to this episode, the self-awareness one of the Women Talking About Learning podcast. I'm Andrew Jacobs. Self-awareness is such a vast topic, I wasn't sure what direction that a podcast recording might go. I was keen to get an inspirational conversation on the complexities of self-awareness, and I was really looking forward to this recording, and having heard it back, I know you will too. We're really happy to welcome three amazing guests to talk through this really complex topic. This week's guests are Sue Stockdale, Caitlin Drago and Rachel Wood. Our first guest is Sue Stockdale. Sue is a polar explorer and coach who champions stepping into the unknown. Her empowering message motivates leaders to conquer fears and uncertainties, from working in a war zone with the UN to becoming the first British woman to reach the magnetic North Pole. Sue embodies resilience. Our second guest is Caitlin Drago. Caitlin's mission is to create cultures of empathy, creativity and trust, beginning with how people communicate and connect. Caitlin is LA-based and is an actor. Our final guest is Rachel Wood. Rachel is a learning business partner with a large technology consultancy and delivery organisation. She's an advocate and explorer of all things learning and thrives on connecting business with the learning industry in creative and impactful ways. This is a remarkable conversation between three remarkable women. Sit back and enjoy listening to Women Talking About Learning. This is Sue, Caitlin and Rachel talking about self-awareness.
Well, hi Rachel and Caitlin. How is life for you today, whatever you are in the world?
It's great for me, although it's a bit of a miserable day here in Leeds in the UK. How about you, Caitlin?
Oh, it's an unseasonably warm day, actually, today in upstate New York. So I'm looking forward to maybe taking a walk later. That'll be nice.
And of course, it's a Friday, isn't it? So perhaps we're all looking forward to the weekend in different ways.
Absolutely.
I'm really fascinated to find out what we all think about the subject of self-awareness. You know, my curiosity is piqued already to think about how does this subject is even of interest to anybody?
Oh gosh, I hope so. For the sake of humanity, I hope so.
So what makes it of interest to you then, Caitlin?
Well, you know, we walk through life not always aware of the impact that we have on others. And when you can have that aha moment of, oh, this is what's going on with me, and this is the impact that it is having on others, it can really help to shift relationships and allow us to communicate with and connect with others in different ways that just allow us for better relationships and that ability to notice, how am I feeling? What's going on with me? How am I coming across? And how is it impacting the way that this other person is also feeling? What about you, Rachel?
I think I loved how you brought out connectedness, because that's what came to my mind when we were talking, or when Sue asked the question. I think for me, I guess it's the impact of me on the world, but it's also about being genuine and authentic. And when you're really understanding of yourself and how that impacts those around you, you can build out some really impressive impact, particularly in your circles of influence. I think, you know, this is a journey that I have been on in terms of building self-awareness. And I think it's a journey everybody's on, whether consciously or unconsciously. And if you can be intentional about it, I think that's when you can get some incredible aha moments. And even if it is about reflecting back on where you've come from, you can almost see some of those things come to fruition and be like, oh, that's what changed me in that moment. And you're able to take that into the future. What about you, Sue?
The way I'm thinking about this is sometimes we see the lack of self-awareness more clearly, or certainly I've seen that with some of the coaching clients that I have, where they have got a blind spot about something, about the way they're conducting themselves. And they come with that lack of self-awareness and sometimes maybe say, well, someone else has told me I've got to fix this thing. There's nothing wrong with me, really. And therefore, I think it's that wonderful sense of taking somebody on a journey without judging them, without making them feel uncomfortable, but slowly and surely helping them to get that aha moment, as you were talking about, Caitlin, where they go, crumbs, was I really like that before? I just didn't see it. And for some, that can be a very quick process. And for others, they can never get there. So I'm just thinking about, as much as we want to have self-awareness, if certainly I think if I went into an organization and asked people, okay, well, who's not self-aware here, people would be really readily spot it. And therefore, perhaps those are the opportunities and the moments to help people develop and grow and change.
I think some of my experience, building on what you said there, has been about people think they have self-awareness, but it's subjective in terms of, actually, is that what other people recognize as self-awareness? Or is that a narrative that you've created about yourself? And that comes through. So I work in internal L&D. I love working in internal L&D. It is a treasure trove of things, and it comes up all the time. So you're talking about having coaching clients. We're probably some of the people that are saying, potentially could use some coaching with this, to try and to build out some of that, because it's the impact, not just, we see it on the teams and feedback that you get from teams on people, or from clients if it's, if you're client facing. So the subjectiveness is a really interesting thought as well.
Yeah, and I want to touch back on something that you said, Sue, too, about the idea that we can come at this without judgment. It can just be, this is what it is. And I'd be interested to hear what types of tools you both use when it comes to bringing out that self-awareness, and what tends to work. When I use like the DISC assessment, which is, one of many tools that one can use, but this measures your communication style, and setting that tone of, everyone has a different communication style. Nothing is right or wrong about any of them. It's just a starting point for that self-awareness, and to understand, again, like Rachel, like you said, the impact that you're having on the world. So
on you go, Caitlin.
No, I was just going to ask, follow up that more specific question with, what is it that you find helps to set the stage for self-awareness? What is that inroad to self-awareness, both with your coaching clients, Sue, and Rachel, with your internal clients?
I guess for me is, when I was a young girl many years ago learning about coaching, the definition for coaching that came from the GROW model and Coaching for Performance book, Sir John Whitmore's book, was about coaching is about raising awareness and encouraging responsibility. And for me, that bit about awareness was not only awareness of other people, but about awareness of self. And so how do I come across when I'm speaking? I might think I'm being really clear and direct, and somebody else is thinking I'm being rude or too pushy, for example, or, just any of our behaviors. And maybe for me, it's worth clarifying what we mean by self-awareness. And I would say it's about how one tunes into one's feelings and emotions and thoughts and actions. And if you've got that awareness, then you have the choice and hopefully the responsibility to then change. And so we can be aware and say, oh yeah, well, I might be very demanding of other people, for example, or I might be too unclear sometimes. So what? I could hear a leader imagine somebody saying that sort of thing. So it's the sense and getting a sense of the consequence on others. And for me, that's, these days, I think, is the more and more there's value in helping people to reflect on and think about the consequence of others, particularly when we're working in this virtual space, where I'm just thinking of a real simple example in a team context is going on to a call and not putting your camera on. And then I've been on calls like that, I'm sure you have as well, where you're thinking, is this person on their phone at the same time? Are they sending a text? Are they bored? What's going on? And it could be a very simple reason that they haven't put their camera on, but because they didn't have the awareness to think about, well, how this might be perceived by others, and maybe even explaining it, then others make judgments and form views about that and take actions accordingly. That's a really simple thing, but a way I think that self-awareness can be helpful to then think, actually, well, what are my actions? What's the consequence of my actions on other people? And maybe therefore I need to adapt my style and my behavior to realize that actually I might want a more positive consequence to communicate something more effectively to other people. So that's my sense of it.
And it is, I love that point of the adaptation too. It doesn't have to be, like you said, well, I'm direct, so what? It can be, I'm direct, maybe they're not. Let's see how we can meet in the middle.
I love that. And I think like going back to what you were saying, Caitlin, about tools and techniques and things, I think as internal, I get asked about lots of different sort of profiling tools and DISC and insights, and the list is as long as your arm. And my request is always, what are you trying to get out of it at the other end? Because often you have seen them used not as they were necessarily intended to be used, but it is a case of, well, I'm a red, cool. Whereas actually it is to that point, this is the starting place of where you're going to get to. I think quite a lot of, so I work in the tech space. Self-awareness is a challenge sometimes in the tech space. A really interesting challenge to be part of, because actually, with the innovations that people come up with and the way in which people work, whether, they're taking on certain methodologies, I think there's ways that people in the smaller teams gather information about themselves or each other, and then are able to have an environment where they can share that information. So it's all about that sort of feedback cycle with each other. But as you grow that, or if you get into sort of outside of a team space and more into like a department or further into a corporate business, that seems to disappear a little bit in terms of how that feedback is brought through. Because I think that's vital when you're trying to learn about yourself, but also learn about other people. That exchange is going to be intrinsic to how you're going to move forward with it.
And do you find that the tech helps or hinders that process, Rachel?
Both in equal measure, which is probably a cop-out thing to say, really. But I think there's slightly different adaptations. I think the ways in which we can work and learn about ourselves are exponentially more because we have space to do that. But the way that we then give feedback haven't necessarily found that adaptation of the culture of how we do that through a screen and remain authentic and remain genuine and intentional about what the purpose is as to giving the feedback. It can come across, I've seen it plenty of times. I gave feedback, it was just a Teams message now. And I was like, well, that's not really how we want to be moving forward. Like, this was constructive feedback for somebody. The rules still apply, like the unwritten rules still apply about, respectful ways that you're going to do this. Face to face, we can still do that. It's just adapted. And I think the biggest barrier is how we maintain the safety when it comes to giving feedback, particularly if it is constructive, because often we're giving feedback into somebody's home. This is their safe place. So they're in their safe place, and you may have said something that has made them question, or is asking them to reflect on something, and it's making them feel uncomfortable in their own home. And I think that's where some of the barriers have come from.
I'd never thought about it like that before, Rachel. That's just a really interesting point you're making there about this, our home. And, if it's a safe space and we're going into a workplace, we've got somewhere to retreat to. If we're there getting that feedback, then where do we retreat to?
Yeah.
There's also something...
Sorry, Caitlin, you go.
Oh, I was just going to say that I think there's also something to the idea that you can receive that feedback and turn off the camera and process it in the way that you need to, where you're not in an office surrounded by a bunch of other people feeling like you need to then, put on a face and continue on with your day surrounded by people. So
Absolutely.
I see where you said, in equal measure that it can hinder and it can help.
Rachel, you earlier mentioned that, you have been on a journey developing your self-awareness. I'm always interested to know, what have you learned and how have you gone about that process for yourself? Because I'm imagining you're a role model for others as well.
So I would call it's really a journey of self-reflection. This is the learning part. It wasn't necessarily designated activity that I was doing. I come from my husband's ex-military, so we moved around a lot, and you get to spend a lot of time by yourself. So you've got to learn about yourself and learn where your strengths are and learn where your strengths are not, to try to either overcome them. So he hasn't really lived it down, but he bought me a sat nav for a wedding gift.
What's
because
that?
So it's like a driving locations mapping. So there's lots of different types. Mine was a TomTom.
Oh, I see.
But he bought it for me as a wedding gift, and everyone thought he was being really rude. But actually, it's probably the most helpful gift he's ever bought me, because we then moved 11 hours away from where we lived, and then he went away. So I was there by myself, and I had no idea where I was, and I didn't have any support. So you get to learn about yourself really, really quickly, and spending that time reflecting on it allows you to think about the things that you want to spend your time on and value your time doing, and also the things that you don't want to spend your time on and don't value doing. So it helped me move in my career. It helped me move in my home life. So there's all sorts of things, but it all stems back to that journey as to, you have to spend some time thinking. And I think particularly in business, so I've worked in large organizations and small ones, it's that time element that isn't necessarily as prioritized as it should be as part of the journey to get towards self-awareness. It's not seen as productive time, or I can't think of more productive time than spending some time reflecting on where you've come from. What are your thoughts, Sue?
You're reminding me of a person I interviewed for a magazine article I was writing, and this was she's an Olympic sportswoman, part of a rowing team, so 4 of them, and I asked them about how they develop and they grow and they develop awareness and keep improving, and she said that what happened was that they don't have time really to do that much of that self-awareness. So what they did was they sort of, what would be the word, nudged themselves. They pre-programmed what they were going to reflect on before they even got on the boat to do a training session. So they would say, okay, this is what we're going to be focusing on today. They would get in the boat, do the training session. And as they got out the boat and carried the boat back to the boathouse, they would be doing their reflection together and saying, what do you think about, what did you do well? What did you want to improve? And they would be thinking about it and reflecting on it for themselves. And to me, that was like a lovely example of, we often say we haven't got time for it, but if we actually know what we're going to think about, we can make the time that we do have more productive. So, I don't know whether that resonates with you, Caitlin, or not, or whether how do you approach self-awareness?
So I love that idea of coupling it with an activity. When we are doing something that's not, okay, I'm going to sit here and I'm going to self-reflect. That's tough to do. When you are rowing and thinking, you're doing something different with your body, it's accessing a different part of your brain. In my work, I use Improv as a platform for interactive learning. And so I'm putting people in a space where they are getting to laugh and do an activity and connect with each other in that way. And again, access that learning part of their brain. And then we reflect on that experience and what did we notice about ourselves and how we work together and how we communicate. It is another inroad that's a little less intimidating, again, than just sitting down with your journal, which I find to be a little challenging at times. It's nice to have that activity coupled with it.
That sounds like a brilliant way to learn, doing that improv. It also seems like it could be a bit uncomfortable for some. Is it ever?
Absolutely. Yes. But I always say I always design for the person who doesn't want to be there. So. But what about you, Sue? For your own self-reflection, what helps you? What kind of tools do you use?
Well, movement is number one. I am not a sit in the room kind of girl with a notebook and writing anything down. I am a move, talk with somebody else very often to gain that awareness. What did you think I was doing there? And how did that work? And or just moving myself. I love being in natures and the outdoors, and that inspires me to actually think, I'm just a human being in this big world, and actually I'm not perfect, and we're all human beings, and we're just making the best of being here. So there's something about contextualizing, and I think sometimes, maybe we I don't know, we put ourselves at the center of the universe more than we need to. And I think then that's for me how I really kind of go like, you know what? Yeah, I'm not perfect and there's things I need to learn here. But in the grand scheme of things, that's fine because everybody's got stuff to learn and nobody's perfect. So that's how I do it. But it's always got a bit of movement in it, Caitlin.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I really like the getting back to nature to get the perspective. And I think so I love having conversations with other learning people because we're just a curious bunch. So we always seem to want to learn either more about ourselves or more about other people. And I think maybe that's our common trait. That's why we all sort of gravitate towards that. But it's about being curious about the world outside of you as well. Like, so going back to your point as to maybe we aren't at the center of it, but we are a part of it. So what is my part to play in this and how can I do that? That really sort of resonates there.
I remember one example that springs to mind was an event that I was organizing for a group of people. And the event speaker was not as good as billed, let's say. So it was an underwhelming speaker. The food was kind of brown and bland and uninspiring as well. And as a result, several of the people that attended the event complained about it. And I just remember later thinking like, wow, I could run away from this, or I could have the courage to pick up the phone and have conversations with those people who've complained and offer them their money back or, apologize to them. And it was like such a great learning. I suddenly realized that for me, that the getting over the hump of the nervousness of something that's going to be difficult and scary, facing into that and having the courage to have those difficult conversations. By the end of it, the people were actually advocates for the event. They didn't want their money back and they really appreciated being called and actually somebody talking to them. And I learned a lot about myself in that very sort of simple thing. Out of a disaster, there was great self-awareness for me. And in future, I realized that if there's any difficult conversation or something I want to avoid, that is the very moment when I need to have the courage to try it out and get uncomfortable. And that has really served me ever since then. But it was a difficult lesson to learn at the time.
And what I'm hearing there, Sue, is that curiosity. It didn't have to be, okay, I have to get on the phone and defend this event. It's let me get on the phone, let me get curious and find out what I can, like you were saying, Rachel, we're a curious bunch and we want to learn from other people. What can I learn from this experience? What is there to be gained here?
Yeah.
And I don't have to be right.
And the time thing, I think, again, when I'm busy, it's very easy to do a knee-jerk reaction to something, to be defensive, to not think about how I'm responding and therefore not really getting any learning from it. I've also learned that to take just a few moments, take a breath before responding and not send that email that I want to send to somebody else.
You can still send it just a little bit later if it's still warranted.
Yes, or send it to myself. At least I've expressed it, but not doing it without thought and then not thinking about the consequences. Then when it's awkward. And Caitlin, what about it from your perspective? Do you think that a lack of self-awareness or a greater level of self-awareness has got any gendered perspective to it?
I think with a lot of things, there's a gendered perspective to it. Maybe not necessarily from nature, but from the societal point. If we look at, and I know that there have been studies that have been done on this, but when young boys hit a certain age, they are given or I guess throughout their whole childhood, there's messaging that comes across in terms of who they're supposed to be. And maybe there's not as much encouragement for them to be self-reflective, whereas young girls and young women get to maintain those close relationships with one another where that safe self-awareness, that non-judgmental space can be maintained so that they can gain that self-awareness. That's a big question. What do you think, Rachel?
I think you're absolutely right. It is a big question. I think so. And speaking just from my own personal experience, there are things that I may have previously held myself back from, and it's not common, or it's not uncommon for for example, women don't apply for as many jobs if they don't think that they hit the criteria. Maybe being aware of some of the things that are maybe not our strengths hold us back from doing them anyway and getting out of the comfort zone or trying to do them. I think we are a strong and powerful group of people, and sometimes self-awareness can be a bit of a wake-up call in terms of, did I really let that happen? So I know that I've been in a situation where in previous employment much longer ago than currently, where I've let people talk to me in a way that I would no longer let anybody speak to me, because I know that I don't find that acceptable anymore. But until I went through that uncomfortable, this is making me feel really unsafe, until I'd built that up as to this isn't right and this isn't normal and this isn't what should be happening, then actually that was able to come through as a learning for me. And that's really sort of changed how I approach some of those conversations and how I approach those relationships now. Sort of setting some really clear expectations. And that's what I'd expect in return as well. So, this isn't just a one-way street, but it can be really painful. And I think back to Sue's point earlier, sometimes getting uncomfortable is really painful or scary. What about your thoughts, Sue?
I think that uncomfortableness is often what can stop people being open to feedback, being open to thinking about, maybe it's me that could be having a weakness here, or maybe there's something I could develop or learn here. And yet going through discomfort, as we all know, going into that, come out of our comfort zone is the zone of learning and growth. And how can, any of us in what our respective activities that we're doing in the learning space, how can we inspire and encourage people to get uncomfortable? And I'm imagining, Caitlin, you must be doing that if you're doing your improv work, that's a really core part of what you're doing.
Absolutely. And it is all about creating that space where people can feel as comfortable as possible getting uncomfortable. And we talked about this earlier when we were mentioning those assessments, like making it really clear, what is the purpose of this? What are we trying to accomplish here? Are we getting uncomfortable just because it's fun to see people squirm? Or are we getting uncomfortable for the sake of learning more about one another so that we can improve X, Y, and Z? What is the purpose? What are the parameters? What are the rules within this context so that I know what to expect and I know that I can share in a way that's not going to be used against me?
What about you, Rachel? In that context about getting uncomfortable, how would you approach it with somebody you're working with?
So I think, and I think it leads back to a couple of the points that we've all made, really. It's about the intention as to what you're trying to achieve. Is that the right time and is that the right space to do it? Leading with the curiosity in terms of what can be the best outcome here for everybody involved. We're not going in, because being uncomfortable in that zone, it's vulnerable. It's a vulnerable space to be. So how do you maintain that safety for yourself, but also for the people that you're with and you're impacting? Because we don't know what's happening in other people's lives. We just know what we can see and what's been shared with us. So I think there's a real opportunity to not go in all guns blazing and make people feel more uncomfortable than they need to be, and really thinking about having empathy with that person in that moment, particularly when you're giving feedback. It might be challenging feedback and it might be required. You can still feel for that person at the same time, and that requires you sometimes setting yourself aside and understanding how you set yourself aside and don't sort of over project, really.
That's a really important point, Rachel. I'm just also wondering around how we help people to get into the habit of continual self-awareness and growth and learning. I mean, I know at the example at the end of meetings I often run or coaching sessions, I always ask the people I'm with, so what did we do well here, or what did I do well, and what do you want me to change for the next time? And it's every single time. And so it's part of the habit of the meeting. So people are used to hearing the positives, and they're also used to hearing the development areas. So it's like we practice getting uncomfortable, and therefore we're more used to it. And I don't know whether there are any habits that either of you two, Rachel or Caitlin, conduct to just help yourself and others to get into that habit of continually developing more awareness about themselves.
Yeah, in a similar way, whenever I finish work with people, I ask for feedback. What went well here, what didn't go well here. And to your point, Sue, you're making that those moments of discomfort something that they're used to. You're also modeling it for them so they can see what it can look like. It becomes a little less scary when we can see someone else go through it. What about you, Rachel?
So in a similar vein, I think what we like to do, so working in tech, we're often working with sort of agile teams or technology teams, and they recognize things like retrospectives as part of their common vernacular of work. So adding those into learning initiatives are brilliant. It's a brilliant way to gain feedback for whatever it is that you're doing, but also opening that space where people can give a little bit more context rather than a happy sheet that you get at the end of a session. This is about, what did you gain from this? So I like to use the 4 L's. Like, one of them is, what did you learn? And it's a difficult word, but what did you loathe? What didn't you like? So that we can change it for the next person. And actually, if we go into each of these things like it's almost always a pilot, there's always room for improvement. And I think that sort of mindset allows people to feel comfortable that they can give that feedback as well. It's almost expected of them to do so.
Rachel,
what are
I'm
the other
writing
two?
down. Yeah,
What are the other two L's?
What are the other 2 L's? I'm writing them down.
So now you've got me. So one is, what did I love? So what did I love about this? What did I learn? What did I loathe? And what did it lack? So the lacking and the loathing are the sort of constructive feedback elements. Some of them are subjective, and some of them are deeply personal. I didn't like when you brought this up. Don't use that example again. Okay.
And I like having both loathe and lack, because loathe gives them that opportunity to vent.
Yeah.
And lack gives them the opportunity or that challenge to say, okay, what exactly was it that was missing here so that we can do something differently next time?
Absolutely.
And if I might add on to this idea of the retrospective, Rachel, you're reminding me of going to an art gallery where you might go and see a retrospective of a famous artist and see all their work. At least that's how I interpret what that word means for me.
Yeah.
And in doing that, you're the observer on the piece of work on the wall. And therefore we're one step removed from the situation. And I think that's a really important part of this whole process of feedback and learning and developing awareness, is that we're able to disassociate ourselves from the actual information. So we don't take it to heart, because that's what often happens when people are getting feedback. They take it personally. I always hold in my mind, there used to be a television program in Britain called The Generation Game, where things would go on a conveyor belt in front of the contestant who was trying to pick them or whatever. And I kind of think about that like feedback and learning is like you sitting watching a conveyor belt or a production line going in front of you with this feedback and information or this retrospective. And you're able to be one step removed from it, so you can manage your emotions and your emotional reaction to that feedback. So that would be my kind of top tip to a listener, to say, if you want to develop more self-awareness, learn to have that conveyor belt approach where you can be disassociated and manage your emotions so that you actually can really hear and listen to what's being said. What would be your top tips, Caitlin and Rachel?
Now you've got me thinking. What would be my top tip? I think mine would be about the environment, and it's all of the advice that we're given around feedback and things is it needs to be in the moment. It just needs to be timely. It needs to be timely feedback, because in the moment may not be the right time to have that conversation. And as to your point, Sue, be able to take that step back and look at it in a factual manner rather than an emotional manner. So mine would be about being really aware of the environment in which you are asking people to be uncomfortable.
So important. Caitlin?
And I think mine would be to stay curious and to notice what's happening. You know, what is the emotion that's happening? How does my body feel in this moment? And instead of judging it or saying this is wrong, I need to get myself out of this, you know, taking that moment and getting curious about, well, what is triggering this in me right now? And what can I learn from that?
Sounds like we've hopefully given our listeners some useful practical tips that they can go away to develop their self-awareness. I've loved speaking to both of you.
Yeah, this was lovely. Nice to meet you, Sue and Rachel.
We hope you gained some valuable insights into the world of self-awareness and personal growth. There were loads of useful tips and knowledge from Sue, Caitlin and Rachel, yet it felt like they only scratched the surface. A huge thank you to all three of them for giving up their time and sharing their wisdom. You can find links to all the references they mentioned in the show notes, along with Sue, Caitlin and Rachel's profiles and contact details. We've some super episodes coming up before Christmas. And if you're interested in being a guest on future episodes, then please do get in touch. All of our contact details are in the show notes. We'll be back in a couple of weeks with another special episode of Women Talking About Learning. And to mark the International Day of Disability, next time it's the disability one. As always, thanks for listening, and we'll see you again soon.